So yeah, my name is Jonathan Briggs. In case you don't know me, I'm a policy officer at DG SANTE in the European Commission, and I'm working on the revision of the EU food contact material legislation. And today I'm going to talk about both the evaluation which precedes the revision and also the revision itself. Just very quickly, which is probably a very, let's say, a familiar reminder for a lot of you, but it always helps to start, I think, our presentations to show what we have at the moment. So we have a regulation in place. The origins of that actually go back to 1976, you'll see in a minute, but the current framework, as we call it, Regulation 1935-2004, has two objectives. So the first is on providing for a high level protection of human health, and secondly, to ensure the effective functioning of the internal union market concerning placing food contact materials on the market. You'll notice there's no emphasis there on sustainability or environment. When we talk about food contact materials, it's quite a broad scope. So we talk about already in contact with food, such as packaging, kitchenware and tableware, which is intended to be brought into contact with food, but that also includes the food processing equipment you might find in food business operators, and also, as it says in the regulation, anything that can reasonably be expected to be brought into contact with food or transfer into food under normal foreseeable conditions of use, which is a bit of a subjective topic. So a typical example might be napkins, but it really depends a little bit on the interpretation of the person applying the legislation. So it sets out general rules and processes for food contact materials, including the basic safety requirements, also some definitions, requirements on labeling and traceability for the industry, and also inspection and control by member states. It has the powers to set out specific measures. So these are what people tend to talk about, harmonized measures. So we have that mainly for plastic food contact materials here in the EU. This includes the an authorized list of substances which can be used in the manufacture of plastic food contact materials. So it's really based on the composition with the starting substances, the role of the European Food Safety Authority in the risk assessment, and also several restrictions such as specific migration limits and prohibitions which go with this. We also have a basic legislation on good manufacturing practice. So that's the background to what we have at the moment. A while ago, so back in 2016-17, we decided to carry out an evaluation. Why? Because, as I've said, it's almost 45 years old now. It's never been properly evaluated. The main specific measure, the harmonized measure for plastics, has been there also over 30 years now at the EU level. There's been a lot of support from stakeholders to improve the situation. They see problems and concerns either over the safety or indeed the functioning of the market in the union. And we also preceded this with a baseline study by the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, which mapped out the supply chains for each of the different material types, and also, more importantly, probably the national legislation which is in place in a number of member states. And that found, as a very general remark, that there were, of course, many complexities in the supply chains, which I'm sure many of you are aware, but also that there are many national rules in place which are sometimes or often diverging. So as a recap to the evaluation process, this started around 3 years ago. We had a study done by the contractor Ecoris, and they were in charge of, for example, carrying out lots of the consultation activities. There was a 12-week public consultation on this. There were many targeted interviews, surveys, focus groups, case studies, and we had a couple of workshops, which I'm sure some of you were at. We're currently in the process of drafting what's called a staff working document. So this is actually still work in progress. It's I would say, the definitive output from the evaluation. It's based on that report, the consultation activities, also the JRC study that I mentioned, some work that we've done on enforcement and controls with the member states, and also a study that we've done on compliance in the supply chain. So that will conclude on the evaluation and feed into the next steps, which is indeed the revision, which has already been announced. It was announced in the Farm to Fork strategy last year. So you'll see from there, I've just tried to highlight the main points concerning food contact materials to improve food safety and public health, in particular, reducing the use of hazardous chemicals, also to support the use of innovative and sustainable packaging solutions, including environmentally friendly, reusable and recyclable materials, also taking into account food waste as well. And also under the Sustainable Products Initiative, which is part of the Circular Economy Action Plan, the SAAP, to work on an initiative to reuse on the reuse in food services of substituting some of these single-use plastic food implements and cutlery, which will no longer be allowed. So that's the main, I would say, strategy from the Commission, which concerns the revision. But there are two very much linked strategies. One, as I've mentioned, the SAAP, which is about reducing packaging or over-packaging, packaging waste, trying to drive design for reuse rather than single-use, recyclability, which is very important, I think, particularly for certain materials, and reducing the complexity of that packaging. So that's something which we're not directly involved with in SANTE. It's more for DG Environment, so another part of the European Commission, but we're working very much together. There's also a new directive, as I mentioned, on those single-use plastic products, which are slowly being replaced by others, which are biodegradable, compostable, recyclable, reusable, etc. There's also the chemical strategy for sustainability, which is focusing much more on the, let's say, the most hazardous substances. And there you see some of the aims that we would like to achieve as part of that. And again, the food contact materials is very much part of the chemical strategy, particularly in terms of prohibiting some of the most hazardous chemicals. So really targeting the ones which considered to be the most concerned, so cancer-causing chemicals, endocrine disruptors, and also to look at how we can better address potential combination effects of substances. And there's also this process ongoing to try to understand how we can better harmonize particularly the risk assessment or hazard risk assessment on chemicals across the chemicals legislation, taking into account the fact that there are different demands and we have different systems in place. We use, as I mentioned, EFSA for the risk assessment of food contact materials. On the other hand, there is another agency, the European Chemicals Agency, which is also very much involved in scrutinizing the safety of many of the same substances. Here we have a very broad summary of the key problems, which we were already, I would say, aware of to some extent with dialogue with stakeholders and our own experience, but nevertheless, from doing the evaluation, we were able to confirm that there are several issues with the current situation and the legislation. So the first one being that there are potential problems with inter-trade, possibly because of the absence of clarity or the presence of different member state national rules and potential safety issues. So some areas which require further scrutiny. We see some significant issues with the current approach that we take for plastics, which is this step-by-step approach of authorizing substances for the manufacture of plastics, where that's tended to lead to a little bit of a lack of focus on the final article and all of the possible migrating substances. Something which is tied in with the chemical strategy is indeed the lack of prioritization of the most hazardous substances and ensuring that the science is up to date. A big one, I think, is the availability of information in the supply chain to ensure that exchange of information and transparency to ensure compliance, and also as you see from number 5 on the enforcement as well, this is actually quite difficult for member states, taking into consideration their resources. So that's something we also need to take into account and address. The rules are not particularly well geared for a lot of small and medium enterprises. There are many sectors who have a high proportion of SMEs and micro businesses, so that's something else we need to look at. We need to have rules which are encouraging these safer and more sustainable alternatives, and also there was some feedback as part of the evaluation that we need more clarity on the subject matter and on definitions. So in the roadmap, which we published in December, we set out some of the issues that we want to tackle and how we want to tackle them. So I think the first thing that we thought we would want to do is to shift the focus more onto the final material, to have rules which are better aimed at addressing the full characteristics of that final FCM for the consumer, how defining the levels of safety that should be achieved, discussion on how to go about this, either through law or with taking into consideration the best methods for the industry, possible strengthening of rules on GMP, and also to broaden the kind of material types when we're thinking about these different materials. In the current annex, they're very much separated into specific material types, whereas we consider that there should be some synergy and efficiency gains with perhaps thinking about them in much more broader types and avoiding some of the difficulties that we currently see. We want to prioritize the substances, so at the moment we don't have a system for doing this. We simply assess and authorize substances because they're used to manufacture plastic and no other reasons. So this is something which, as I've said, is very much part of the chemical strategy. So we need to think about all of the substances coming from food contact, not just the ones which are intentionally used. We're considering a type of tiered approach, so to prioritize, as I've said, the ones which are causing cancer, the CMRs, EDs, and PBTs, and this is found in the chemical strategy. You can see that quite clearly. We need to establish the criteria and information requirements and how we implement it in the FCM legislation, which will be part of the impact assessment. We need to look at other substances which might need closer scrutiny, either